It's known as the class that the stars fell on, because 59 of the graduates will become at least a one-star general. So all the guys in 1915 are pretty much big timers. So he goes to Fort Sam Houston. It's in the early 1900s, and he's always given the logistical job, planning, statistics. He was very, very good at that. And it was kind of boring to a lot of people. They're like really, really good accountants. To him it was like a puzzle. It was something that needed to be solved, and it was a lot of fun. So he enjoyed it. And he was then sent to Camp Meade in Maryland to help organize this new thing called a tank, and trying to organize stuff. And he runs into a guy named George Patton. And a lot of people don't know, but Patton and Eisenhower, completely opposites, have a very long history together. And it will come back and help both of them at different times. And Patton and Eisenhower traveled to Gettysburg, where they practiced tank maneuvers. And Patton was going, they need to go faster. We need to do this. We need to be more aggressive. And Eisenhower's saying, like, well, why? Well, why have all this power and not use it, all right? Don't think of them as support. Think of them as cavalry, all right? They're horses. They need to go faster. And Eisenhower writes all this down. And the two get themselves into a lot of trouble by arguing with their superiors. This is how we need to do things. But it is here at Fort Meade that Eisenhower begins to develop an eye for talent, to assess an officer, his strengths and weaknesses, and then plug him in to the right situation. Now that job is not for you, but if I put you over here, this is what you can do. And one of his favorite pastimes, he liked playing poker, he liked playing bridge, and he loved playing chess. All right, we're going to put you here, and we're going to do this. And so he meets Patton, and World War I is getting ready to kick off, and he's angry that he doesn't get selected. He was too important in Washington, moving pieces of the giant puzzle around. He doesn't get to go. And this comes back to haunt him in World War II, because it's something his British critics, especially Bernard Law Montgomery, never let him forget. Well, who are you to lead the army? You don't have any combat experience. And he's like, I'll give you combat experience. Are you a little ferret? Watch this. So anyway, all right, whoops. Where am I? All right. So 1919, war is over. He becomes a major, a rank he has for the next eternity. But his first job is to take a military convoy from Washington, D.C. to San Francisco to test out military capacity and the roadway system. And his convoy averages 5 miles an hour. And he's like, dear God, this sucks. We don't have roads. The roads we have are terrible. We're never going to get there. And this crystallizes in his mind the need for a new road system. And when he gets to the Autobahn in Germany, he's like, no, this is what we're going to do. All right. So anyway, from 1920, he spends a lot of time. He's highly sought after by powerful guys in the military, especially John Pershing, Doug MacArthur, and George Marshall. All three of them were the chief of staff for the Army. Today, that would be the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the #1 Army guy in the country. They all want Eisenhower. He also picks up on his academics. He's sent to the Army War College, and he blows the competition away, graduating first out of 225 other candidates. So he's brilliant. This is Pershing. This is MacArthur, and this is Marshall. Has a pretty good relationship with this guy, great relationship with him, and a good but then an ugly divorce with this guy here. His first task by John Pershing is to help build the American Battlefield Monuments Commission, the thing started by Clara Barton. And after World War I, there were 15,000 American soldiers over in the Meuse, Argonne that needed to be buried. Eisenhower helped Pershing create and build the organization and the Meuse-Argonne Cemetery, the first integrated cemetery in American history. He then comes back, and Douglas MacArthur is chief of staff, and he goes, oh, well, you worked for Pershing, you're now working for me. And a lot of people say MacArthur's brilliance and the planning that he conducted was really Eisenhower's stuff that MacArthur took credit for because he was superior. They go over to the Philippines, where MacArthur wants Eisenhower to become chief of police and the head ambassador in the American embassy, military advisor to the ambassador in the Philippines. When all of a sudden, new chief of staff for the Army, George Marshall, plucks him away from MacArthur. And MacArthur's, you can't take my guy, he's my guy. And Marshall says, well, yeah, I can. You're coming with me. And Marshall had this bizarre little thing. He had literally a little black book. And when he would go around and travel and meet officers, he would ask them questions. And he would give them some bizarre task, like, I want to invade Canada using Cherokee tomahawks in Iroquois canoes going across Lake Erie. How would you get it done? And if the officer said, well, you know, how much money do I have, or can you help me, or how do you think I should do it, there was a line struck through their name. But if you just kind of did it on your own, your name was cemented in Marshall's little black book. Well, when he gave Eisenhower the task, Eisenhower comes back like 4 hours later. Well, you know, Iroquois canoes are pretty good, but Pawnee are made for rougher water, so we're going to use those. We're going to use a hybrid tomahawk, and I have 3 launch points. I've got Detroit, Cleveland, and Buffalo. How do you want to do it? Marshall's like, all right, this is my guy. So he brings Eisenhower back and gives him a job in the War Department. His job, small task. Eisenhower, you figure out the plans of how we're going to defeat not only Nazi Germany, but the Empire of Japan. Hop to it, young man. He's like, really? Is that all? Awesome. All right. So yeah.
How is it that he managed to stay major for 16 years?
Because there was no conflict. There was no money for promotions. So they just left him there. He's like, can you give me a bump? Can you know, make me this like a colonel or something? 16 years. Yeah, doing thankless, nasty work. Yes, sir.
There was no up or out or mandatory retirement.
So you
Generals died in office, and that made the next step.
The next step. So once one peg is removed, up you go. Here's the Meuse-Argonne. This is looking at the entrance portico towards the chapel. 6 even grids of alphabetized soldiers, 1 from every state and 1 from Alaska and Puerto Rico. Alaska wasn't a state yet. So anyway, there's the old Meuse-Argonne. And end of 1942, he is sent to London to assess our head general there in charge, a guy named James Chaney. When he returns, Marshall says, well, Ike, what do you think about Chaney? He's like, well, you know, he's General Chaney. No. What do you think of what he's doing? Well, you got to answer honestly, but you also don't want to, you know, undercut a man who's above you in rank. And Marshall's like, damn it, Ike, I need to know, can he do the job? And Eisenhower says, well, I just don't feel real good about the quality of work that he's doing. Marshall says, awesome. Chaney, you're fired. Eisenhower, if you don't like what he's doing, it's your job now. Now he has his promotion. All right, here we go. There he plans Operation Torch, the invasion of North Africa. He becomes the first non-Brit in 200 years to command the island of Gibraltar, there off of Spain. He's got to invade North Africa while hoping the Spanish don't get involved, and he has to hope the French will not fight us. And he plans a bit of subterfuge. He asks a guy named Francois Darlan to tell the soldiers to stand down. And Darlan says, no, the only way you can invade North Africa is if I lead your forces. And Eisenhower's like, well, you can't. You're French, you don't speak English, you don't have any forces, you can't do this. And so Darlan says, if you don't let me do it, I'm going to tell the Germans what you're doing. And in a bit of subterfuge, Eisenhower has to bring Henry Girard over from North Africa. But Girard hates the British. So Eisenhower gets the British to give us one of their subs. We put an American captain aboard and cover up all the British flags on the sub until the guy is aboard. And then as they're going under the Mediterranean, he's like, hey, can I get a hamburger and French fries? Or, we don't call them fries, mate, we call them chips. What? This is a British ship, you guys lied to me. So he was all angry, and Eisenhower's like, oh my God, can one of you French morons just work with me? So anyway, lots of stories about that. We got to get to his presidency. Torch is kind of a debacle. It works, but we were lucky. A lot of things went wrong that we learned from. And one of the things that Eisenhower had a fault with, kind of like Robert E. Lee, was his loyalty. And his best friend in the Army since West Point was a guy named Lloyd Friedenthal. And Friedenthal takes the Third Army into North Africa and is just shellacked at the famous Battle of Kasserine Pass, where an understrength, broken down army led by Erwin Rommel just destroys the U.S. Third Army. Embarrassing. And Eisenhower goes out to find out what happened. He's driving around in his Jeep. You seen General Friedenthal? Friedenthal, who the hell is that? You seen Friedenthal? And he finds that Friedenthal was 60 miles back, having all the engineers digging him a headquarters in a cave, surrounded by barbed wire, concrete bunkers, anti-tank mines, all that stuff that was supposed to be sent to the front to defend the soldiers at Kasserine. Whatever went wrong at Kasserine, it's still under 100-year presidential... Whoa, did I just do that? Oh, what? Hoping my ball didn't blow out, did it?
You hit the top of your thing.
Doing that.
All right, there we go. All right, now that works. Tripping out. All right, anyway, it's still under presidential signed orders. We really don't know what went on there. Eisenhower says, well, we just can't have this. Lloyd, you're fired. What? You can't fire me, I'm your best friend. He's like, well, I just did. And that shows the world his authority as commander. He will put in the great George Patton, who we will talk about next. After North Africa, he outlines and okays the invasion of Sicily. That is a little better. And he's involved in the planning of Italy, but in the middle of that, he is brought to London. And there he is told that he is going to be given a new title of the Supreme Head of the Allied Expeditionary Force. You are going to command everything, Army, Navy, air power, and you are going to plan D-Day. You are the #1 guy put in charge. 3 other names were bandied about. One was George Marshall, one was John Pershing, one was Sir Arthur Tedder. All 3 of them had problems. When all 3 were asked, if it can't be you, who would it be? Every single one of them said, Eisenhower. He has the only guy that's able to handle and soothe the egos of a multinational organization and still get stuff done. So while he's there, he's not only head of all Allied forces, he's also the main theater commander for the American troops. So he's got to wear 2 hats. The head American, but also the head ally. A very difficult job as those things overlap and intertwine. Things are, this is him in North Africa with Henry Durand finally. But in London, here he is in his war room with all the bigwigs. Right before D-Day, he has a problem. That he had this elaborate deception scheme, and the Air Force, the Army Air Force and Royal Air Force, had to bomb like railroad round tables and other targets in random orders, not only in Normandy, but also way far away over in the Pas de Calais. You can come on in. Or you need Mom?
No, we're good. Keep going.
All right, all right. Okay, have a seat or hang out, either one. All right, so anyway, when the Royal Air Force balks and says, no, we want to bomb Germany, Eisenhower says, look, you can bomb Germany all you want, but on May 7th, 8th, and 9th, I need these targets blown up. And the British wouldn't agree. And he's like, well, dang it, I'm going to Churchill. And Churchill says, oh, boy, if the Royal Air Force wants to bomb Germany, you have to let them. And Eisenhower says, by God, I've spent 17 months planning this operation. This close to the end, am I the supreme head or am I the supreme assistant? And I'll tell you what, I quit. I'm going to go home and I'm going to coach baseball at West Point. Churchill's like, you can't do that. He's like, why the hell not? Yes, I can. It's spring. So he goes and he's packing, he's slamming stuff in his trunk, and he calls Marshal, George, it's Ike. Freaking angry, this is going to need to happen, wouldn't do it, I'm coaching baseball, you better endorse me, I quit, and he slams down the phone. Marshall's like, I don't know what's going on. Calls President Roosevelt, Mr. President, look, Dwight called, he's angry, something about bombs and Churchill and the RAF, and he's coaching baseball at West Point, we have to endorse him. I have no idea what's going on. All right, Roosevelt supposedly picks up the phone and calls Churchill. And he says, look, my man Ike says he needs the planes, he gets the planes. Either give him the planes or he's going to coach baseball at West Point. So legendarily, typical British night, it's raining, and Eisenhower was given a castle on the Thames to work out of, but he preferred the gardener's cottage, where he had a Franklin stove, a cot, and a little table. He's out there packing his trunk, and there's a knock at the door. What do you want? I said, not to be disturbed. Excuse me, General Eisenhower, the Prime Minister would like you to know that if you want the planes, you get the planes. Well, if he wants me to have the planes, he can bloody well come out here and tell me himself. And he slams the door. And he says later, I probably shouldn't have done this. About 10 minutes later, there's a knock at the door. And standing in his bowler hat with a soggy baseball bat cigar with mud up to his knees is Prime Minister Churchill going, sorry, Ike, old man, if you want the planes, you got the planes. Excellent, Prime Minister. I'll be at work in a few hours. Thank you, sir. So he wins that one. He stands his ground there. He also uses his old friend George Patton in an elaborate deception scheme called Operation Fortitude. And Patton will be relieved of command for slapping 2 soldiers, but he was moved all around Europe, giving VIP tours, and whenever he showed up, the German army would divert massive amounts of troops to where Patton was. Patton is never aware he's part of the deception until right a couple months before D-Day. D-Day is successful. We know about the breakout of France. However, Eisenhower does make 2 mistakes. He lets the Germans get through the Falaise Gap, 1. And number 2 was the ill-fated Operation Market Garden, which he said if it had just 1 chance in 100 of success, I had to go for it. That is the airborne attack through the Netherlands, which fails. Patton was poised 10 miles from Germany, and he has to hold and wait. He told Eisenhower, look, you give me the gas, let me blow up German villages, destroy their crops, kill their livestock, run over their glockenspiels, they'll quit. Their infrastructure hasn't seen the devastation of war. Let me blow some stuff up, and I guarantee they will quit. Eisenhower says later, if he could go back and redo 1 decision in his entire life and get a do-over, it would be that one. He's like, I would have liked to have seen what happened if I gave Georgie the gas. His big decision in World War II is making the decision not to invade Berlin, something that cost the Russians 300,000 lives. He's like, if they want it as a prize of war, let them have it. 250,000 American lives aren't worth it. So, after the war, he's made military governor. Doesn't do a bad job, but he didn't like being the military governor. But he does send out as many film crews as he can to get documented evidence that he will present at the Nuremberg war trials. He has to reorganize the government in the southern half of Germany and eliminate the longtime Nazi, mayors, burgomeisters, members of parliament, to denazify that part of Germany the best he can. And when he comes home, he is made chief of staff, and he's got to find a way to demilitarize thousands, millions of American soldiers. And one of the things that he is a strong advocate for is the GI Bill, to reward all these guys for their term of service, to pay for them to go to school. It's one of the acts that a lot of people say really build modern America, is taking all these guys and getting them an education. Yes, ma'am?
So, he wasn't one of the authors of it, though.
He was not one of the authors, but he,
Who were the authors?
George C. Marshall really wanted. He's like, look, we got to give these guys, something for their term of service. 1948, President Truman says, hey, look, if you want to be president, I can make that happen. This time, Eisenhower was a Democrat. He's like, no, look, I'm a soldier. He goes, you could nominate me from the village idiot to the grand wizard of the empire, and I will decline. I'm a soldier. That's all I want to do. He comes home, and he's given the job as president of Columbia University. Now, this is a match that just doesn't fit. He doesn't fit in that academic world. And he tries to promote democracy through what he called, they called it the American attitude of education. Let's use education to promote democracy. He was always traveling, promoting his new school, and also fundraising for Columbia. So a lot of the Board of Trustees, they get frustrated with him. And he's called upon all the time to solve problems. He's Eisenhower. So he becomes the first supreme commander of NATO, and he's like, look, I can't do all these jobs. He tries to resign from Columbia. Even though they didn't like him, they refused to accept his resignation. He's like, fine, man, I just won't do the job very well then. What are you going to do to me? So anyway, 1952, he changes, and he begins to take an interest in politics. And he doesn't really like the new Democratic stance. Like, well, no, you don't understand. Like, we've got to be strong. He didn't like nuclear weapons. He goes, but if they are a deterrent, we've got to pay mention to them. And he creates the I Like Ike slogan, one of the easiest catchphrases in presidential history. And in 1952, he becomes a Republican. But all the old line Republicans hate him. Well, you used to be a Democrat. Well, and you're a moron. So I'm a new Republican, and he says the old Republicans will get on board or they will get gone. I'm going to take over. This is what we need to do to move the country forward in this century. So, a couple of crazy things. He's the only general to serve as president in the 20th century. He never holds political office till he's elected as president. Kind of like Lincoln. If you're going to do it, you might as well, go big. Right? If you're going to do it, do it. So, one of the things he wants to put an end to is the Korean War. And one of the things he was very, very careful was the nuclear deterrent. He didn't like it, but he said, we have to use it. All right? After the Russians got a hold of nuclear weapons, this is the only thing we can do to keep equal footing, but we can't push it too far. So here's I Like Ike, and here's a great photo because he believed that he held more press conferences at the time than anybody. He used them almost constantly. It was his belief that it's the way he stayed in touch with the American people. If I convey them what I am doing, what I am trying to do, they will follow me. So he was always in front of the cameras or the radio, the mediums of the time. So he's always fighting the old guard Republicans, but the hallmark of his early presidency is that interstate highway system. He's like, look, what we're going to do, we're going to get a series of roads. Even numbers are going to run east and west. I want 3 or 4 across the country. Odd numbers are going to run north and south. And as you probably know, this 1 mile in every 6 has got to be straight in case we need to land and take off aircraft in times of crisis, hurricane, natural disaster, or nuclear war. All this comes out of his memory going from Washington to San Francisco and seeing what the Germans had done in Germany. And in 1953, he gives probably, wasn't a great speech maker, but he gives a great speech called A Chance for Peace. Look, he remembered the Soviets from working with them in the war. He's one of those guys that wasn't like, the Soviets are commies and we don't like them. But he remembered some of the good officers that he worked with. He gives this great, speech, we're going to give peace a chance. And it looks like it just might work, and then Joseph Stalin dies. And like, why? It's not a bad thing. I mean, thank God we're rid of Joe. But it destroys the chance at peace. And a couple other things are going to go wrong I'll tell you about in a second. But he did believe in the domino theory of communism. If one country falls, they're all going to go. But the French were embroiled in Indochina. And he's like, man, we just finished up in Korea that has some really nasty open wounds. Sorry, France, I can't back you there. I'll give you supplies, I'll give you equipment, I'll give you intelligence, but I'm not sending a soldier to help you fight to hang on to a colonial territory. I just can't do it. Here is the interstate roadway system. I'm sure we've all been on it. It's right out the road. Only 2 places that don't have highways built by Eisenhower are Alaska and Hawaii and Puerto Rico. However, Eisenhower will admit Hawaii and Alaska as states. That's another thing he gets to do. He does call for a CIA spying. He was a big spy. They were a bridge of spies. And when the Soviets launched Sputnik, he's like, oh, I can't let them win. So he calls for a greater use of space when no one thought it was really possible. Another thing he does is he draws up the original plan for the Bay of Pigs invasion. It was the outline that was used, but the timetable was vastly different from the debacle that was the Bay of Pigs. And the one guy that Eisenhower could not stand in the political realm is John Kennedy. You figure John Kennedy was famous for something that should have gotten him a court-martial. The famous PT-109 incident, he was captain of the ship, he was asleep in the middle of a channel when it was supposed to be watching for Japanese cruisers. While he was the captain, it was cut in half by a Japanese destroyer. And yes, he saved the lives of his men, but he should have torpedoed this ship because you're famous, but you should have been court-martialed. He was not a big John Kennedy fan. So he's the first to call for satellites, and he does that by creating NASA. No one knows, but it is Dwight Eisenhower who creates NASA. So he gets that off the ground, and now it comes to Korea. Eisenhower was head of the European theater. Well, MacArthur won the Pacific, but the European theater was more popular. People liked that one. And MacArthur felt that he should have been president, but it's his former assistant who is now president. So MacArthur did not like Eisenhower giving him orders. Eisenhower says, you will stop at such and such point. You will not go northward into North Korea. You will stay away from the Yalu River and China, and MacArthur doesn't. So Eisenhower, on a trip over to Korea, sees what's going on. He has to relieve his former boss of command. And Eisenhower fires MacArthur, and that really destroys their relationship. So MacArthur never forgives Eisenhower, and Eisenhower's like, well, if you would have, I am the commander-in-chief for a reason. When I give you an order, you have to follow it. He's the one that will help write the armistice, ending the hot conflict of the Korean War, even though it is still a war zone to this day. And he uses his clout with the British and the French and tells them to get the heck out of Egypt. They invaded Egypt. There was a threatened closing of the Suez Canal. And Eisenhower says, if you guys go in there, whether you're Israel, whether you're France or England, to try and take over the Suez Canal for imperial gain, I will use every financial and diplomatic tool at my disposal to get you out. These are our best allies. And Eisenhower's like, no shenanigans over there. Here is a picture of the DMZ where Eisenhower visited. If you're standing here, I'm getting close to the joint security area. It gets more and more and more forbidding as you get there. This is looking northward into North Korea. This is called the Death Star. You can see little tunnels and things underneath it. They even have their planes take off out of camouflaged jetways in and out of here. I can tell you about the DMZ all day, but it's a very nasty, disturbing place. Eisenhower was there, and it is still there. Oh boy, so 825, okay, here we go. He said he would not allow communism to be spread into the Middle East, and Eisenhower is the one who really brings American interest to the Middle East. The stuff we're dealing with today, Eisenhower kind of started back in the 50s saying, we will protect any friendly government in the Middle East, we'll keep communism out, we'll protect you, you can repay us with your cheap oil. He also reinstates the famous Shah of Iran, who was deposed in 1979 with the Ayatollah. He has strong words for the Soviet Union during the Hungarian Revolution, and China, after MacArthur got them provoked, coming closer and closer into North Korea, he tells China, if you don't back off, I will be forced to use nuclear weapons. I hate them, but then they're really effective, so back off before you get a taste of it, and China withdraws back into their traditional boundaries. 1960, he's working with old political commissar Nikita Khrushchev. Khrushchev comes over to the United States. Eisenhower says, man, let's get the hell out of Washington. And Khrushchev was a big fan of Robert E. Lee. Hey, you want to go see Gettysburg? Oh, you got a place in Gettysburg? Well, yeah. I liked it so much when I was there with Patton, I bought the farm right next door. Oh, yeah, let's go. So they go out to Gettysburg, and to schmooze Khrushchev, Eisenhower would drive him around the battlefield in a convertible, giving him little lectures about Gettysburg. Then they would go back to the Eisenhower farm and go out on his patio and eat this great new invention, the TV dinner. All right? Salisbury steak, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Apparently, Khrushchev ate like 9 of them during the weekend in Gettysburg. How did they relax while eating their TV dinners? A TV set was wheeled outside facing the Gettysburg battlefield, and President Eisenhower's favorite TV show would come on. And they watched Bonanza outdoors looking at Gettysburg. It helped kind of grease the tracks with old Nikita Khrushchev. But in the midst of all that, God bless it, Gary Powers' U-2 crashes over in Turkey while claiming his oxygen mixture wasn't good and he was lost and he crash lands. It was a big debacle, and that reinvigorates the Cold War, something that little Joe, Haas, Adam, and Lauren Green couldn't fix. Not even Robert E. Lee could repair that damage. There's a U-2. Colonel, you ever fly? You ever fly one of them? No, you can't tell us. Never mind. Sorry. I don't know what that is. So there's an answer. All right, there we go. All right, Ponderosa. Other things that he does, a lot of people don't know. Working with the armed forces and the Red Ball Express, he says Washington has got to be the model for the rest of the country. So he orders the public school system, which he really couldn't do, but he does anyway, orders the public school system of Washington, D.C. to be integrated. Says if we can do it here, everybody else is going to do it. He creates the Civil Rights Division within the Justice Department, and he is the one who sends the 101st Airborne in to protect the famous Little Rock Nine, who guarded the 9 African-American students that went to Little Rock High School. My dad was there. You know, he said he was had a M79 grenade launcher and said that it was the only time he ever put a bubble level on it to shoot tear gas. He's like, you know, they always told us it would work and it was a piece of garbage. So that's a big thing that Eisenhower did, you know, another Melega connection. Unbelievably, when Robert Oppenheimer refused to speed up production of newer nuclear bombs to combat the Soviet Union and said, no, I'm not going to do it, Eisenhower fires him. Like, how do you fire Oppenheimer? Like, he created the thing. But he cans Oppenheimer, and he fights a secret covert war against Senator Joe McCarthy. This is the height of the Red Scare and communism. And Eisenhower could not take him on directly, he felt, as it would split and divide the country. So he went at it covertly using emissaries and underlings to discredit and eliminate the boorish Joe McCarthy. He admits 5 justices to the Supreme Court. Here's the Little Rock Nine going to school. And he admits Alaska and Hawaii. He coins the phrase not only the military-industrial complex, but Air Force One. He was flying over New York City, and his plane was almost hit. And the air traffic controller said, well, how do we know the president's on the plane? He's like, tell him my call sign is Air Force One. From that time on, whatever plane the president is on is known as Air Force One. He moves to Gettysburg to convalesce after his 8 years as president. Had a lot of lung cancer issues. He was a major chain smoker. They said during the height of World War II, he may not smoke them all, but he burned through 30 to 50 cigarettes a day. He will die in 1969 at Walter Reed Medical Center. And at his funeral, one of his vice president, former Secretary of State Richard Nixon, got to speak. And Nixon ran against Kennedy in the 1960 election, and Nixon kind of blamed Eisenhower for his loss, because there was a joke that said, hey, can you think of one thing that Richard Nixon, idea that he had for you as vice president? And Eisenhower laughed and said, well, if you give me 6 months, I might be able to think of one thing. And, all right. All right. So that's all over the newspapers, and Nixon loses. We all know he comes back. But delivering the eulogy at Eisenhower's funeral, this is a guy that wasn't a big fan of Eisenhower, said, he goes, some men are considered great by the armies that they lead or the powerful nations that they are longtime leaders of. He goes, well, for 8 years now, Dwight has been neither of those things. Neither commanded a large army or was in charge of a nation. Yet he remained through his final days the world's most admired and respected man. He was truly the first citizen of the world. When somebody needed something done when he was alive, they went to Dwight. So a very quiet, very underrated president who does things from before World War I all the way through the Cold War, including admitting 2 states, building a road system, and desegregating schools. All right, it is 9:30, 8:30, 9:31 trouble. I move we lump in George Patton. Next week is supposed to be the common man, but I think we're going to put Patton in there as a little. We can go through Patton pretty fast and spend the last time, unless you guys want to stay for Patton. Everyone looks tired. I see some yelling. All right, we'll table Patton. If you want to stay for Patton, I'll give you a one-on-one. If not, we'll pick him up next week. It's the final week. Oh my God, it's been 10 weeks already. It's flown by. So hopefully we'll see tulips and daffodils soon. So that's what I'm waiting for. We got to get this all done before the basketball tournament starts, and you guys all of a sudden lose interest in important things. So, all right, any questions before I head off on the mic? No? All right, well, I'll see you guys. I'll see you guys next week.
Just one thing.
Yes, sir.
My recollection was it was true.
Yes. But it was done with Eisenhower's. Eisenhower was working.
How are you?
What was Calvin up to? I practice.
Crossing.
All right, thank you, sir. Thank you.
The guy, Mary said it was like 10-0 at halftime, they were down. 3-0.
13 to 2 was the final.
Oh, okay.
Why are they playing in the 40s?
That?
Why are they playing in the 40s? There's Civil War soldiers.
Oh my God! All right.
Yeah.
St. Mary's Church, where?
Fairfax, Virginia.
Fairfax, Virginia. All right.
Really,
That's where
really
two
played
boys
well.
were.
And Zach and Jack looked Baptist.
Really? They're both excellent. Excellent.
Oh, yeah.
Like up on
We want Astros next week in New York. Yeah.
very important spot.
66 boys and 45
There's hundreds, thousands
Right
Well,
there.
there used to be.
Oh, it used to be.
Yeah.
I get it.
Yeah.
General. Coming in an hour.
Excellent. All right.
April 14th, April 21st.
Very well.
Thursday nights. Thursday nights
I'm
for
gonna
me.
check their same one.
No, Pat Rober's not to help you because Reagan never got up to it. So,
Yes, sir.
you never did that. I think,
Oh, give me 1 second here. I'm gonna hit off on the camera here before I record us doing nonsense.